Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from SIA Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House alongside my good friend and colleague, Mr. Martin Popoff. What's happening, Martin? Happy Friday to you.
Yeah, it is a happy Friday. It's a super warm summer day here in Toronto. It was yesterday as well. Got out for a jog. So, yeah, I'm going to go for a drive and a jog today. So,
There you go. Yeah, it was 93 here yesterday.
yeah.
What? April 13th, 93. Today, I think it's going to be exactly the same. And then it's going to go right back to normal. I think like Monday or Tuesday, it's going to be back in the 50s. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? It's very, very strange. But I don't know. Trying to discuss the weather these days is like the craziest thing you could possibly do. It's just out of control. But I'm glad the weekend is here. So what's really interesting is like when Martin and I tape these shows, it actually is the morning of the day that it's actually going to air. So in many cases, I'm taping shows here on the channel that the day it airs and the day it's happening is not one and the same. So we have to kind of pretend that it's a big joke on the UK connection because we always record those episodes like a week in advance. And
Wow.
so like we're talking about, oh, today is this. And then
Yeah.
we have to make pretend that it's like a week later. So it's always like a running joke about it. But actually this is like pretty
Yeah.
what do you call it? Day and date, right? So
Yeah.
the fun house is actually happens on Friday morning. So
Absolutely.
it's which is kind of fun actually. So anyway, we have a really interesting show for you here today that I think will resonate with some folks, might be a little controversial for some folks, but I think it's a show that has to happen because we did an April Fool's joke recently where we joke was that we were going to do a punk show here on the channel, and a lot of people watched that. And I don't know what the percentages are, Martin. I think you looked a little bit closer at the comments than me, but there was a great percentage of people who didn't get the joke and were very excited about it. There were people who were like, I hope this is a joke because I don't want to see a punk show on SOT. There were other people that are like, I know this is a joke, but it's a shame because I really would like to see a punk show on here. And it was all over the map. So we were talking about the reaction to it and how some of it was predictable and some of it was surprising and some of it not. And that led to discussions of, covering topics on the channel that people want to see that we're not all that knowledgeable about, and that we have reservations on because we're very specialized here on Sea Tranquility. If you haven't guessed, right, there's certain genres we cover. That's what we do. The reason I started this channel is because those are styles of music that I love, that I know a lot about, that I'm passionate about. And I get that there are people who watch who maybe want to see other things, but if we as the content creators aren't comfortable or we don't know and we're not familiar with those styles of music, it's a little difficult to just say, all right, we're going to do that. So this kind of led Martin was kind of investigating the comments of that April Fool's video. And we started looking at some of the ones that were really interesting and ones that we want to respond to. And that led us off into all sorts of different directions that I think will make for an interesting hour here. So Martin, I don't know if you want kind of expand on that a little bit, but
Yeah. So this is called Fun House, but this is a no fun episode because
right.
I think we're going to be calling this "Why There's No Punk Parade," right? So we're raining on your punk parade here, kind of
Yeah,
thing, right?
yeah.
So yeah, that was the idea. I mean, I've Pete and I just talked before the show. We've got a page of notes of things that are interesting concepts to talk about, but we've got a bit of a structure, and we're hopefully going to go back and make sure we covered everything. But yeah, so the idea was we were going to read a few of these and hopefully the issues all come out as we do this. And as Pete said, it's all about knowing what you like, knowing what you care about, knowing what you might even potentially care about or not care about. Talking about things you don't really know about. So all of these issues will come out. So yeah, I just wanted to read sort of the first one here and discuss. So one I picked out, usually these are the longer ones, which makes them more interesting. I wish Pete would just open his mind and allow some of the guys to educate him on punk hardcore and some of the crossover stuff. I think he would enjoy some of the Black Flag, the Damned, Suicidal Tendencies material. There's quite a bit of hard rock and metal there, and it's a real shame because I feel a show like this could have got a lot of views. So what I find interesting about this is when people recommend music to me, there are so many criteria in my head going through about what I might be interested in. And the funny thing is about, Pete and I were joking after we got through last week's show, we practically did this whole show in a just discussion because it was so interesting to talk about this stuff. But so the idea is, here's somebody who's saying, I recommend that Pete would like this stuff. But the point is, there's so many reasons, that just like are almost like subconscious calculations of why someone won't be interested, just because there's metal involved, maybe with punk or whatever. Maybe it's a crazy era that he doesn't care about. Maybe it's the type of metal. It's going to be simple. It's going to be mixed with punk. It doesn't have the metal ethos. So every band in every genre has a certain personality to it as well as an aesthetic, what they're trying to get across. Goes from the front cover to the back cover and everything in between, the lyrics, so everything is its own little. I remember doing a podcast episode called Snow Globe Bands, right? Which was about bands who create a little, shake it up snow globe. This is a world they created, right? So genres do the same thing. So if you're not into that world, it's hard to recommend things. So when people recommend things to me, like for example, even me looking at this comment, right? I'm an expert on original punk, right? The absolute does barely even exist, hard to find information from 74. Like forget about the earlier stuff, but 74, 75, I know the earlier stuff too, but the main thing is I thought I knew, I'm going to get to this in a minute. I thought I knew everything about 77, 78, 79. Kind of thing. But the funny thing with this comment that I find interesting is, even though I love and I know this original era of punk, I know it falls off really quick, and I don't care about Southern California punk or Sum 41, not particularly Offspring and Green Day and Rancid and all that stuff. More obscure hardcore. So the funny thing with this comment is, I read this and go, I'm not even interested in the stuff that is so close to punk adjacent. I mean, these bands, okay, The Damned, okay, that's an exception. I'm a huge Damned fan and expert, I suppose, but and Suicidal Tendencies I was into. But for example, if he would have mentioned Agnostic Front and Cro-Mags, even, Cro-Mags, and we're all supposed to,
Rum Suckers, right? Yeah.
I mean, hugely influential and critically acclaimed bands like these that I barely know anything about, kind of thing. So it's funny, I see this comment. So even for someone like me, a whole bunch of punk adjacent stuff, I'm not even going to be that interested in. I'll leave this comment for a little later, but it also falls into the whole era thing too. So as you march through time, I care less and less and less about bands who are influenced by bands who are influenced by bands who are influenced by bands that I liked, right?
Yeah.
So that's a funny thing that happens too. So you know what you like, and there's so many different reasons why you like it. And like I say, a lot of it has to actually do with the core of your personality, whether this aesthetic has anything to do with you, let alone how much metal is in it. I guess I'll stop there for this one.
And I want to comment on this one because it actually leads into my next comment. They're kind of similar, right? But before I do that, I do want to mention, because Martin hinted at it before. So after we taped last week's show, we actually started talking about this one, and we went on. Our discussion was like a half hour, and after like a half hour, we were like, we should have just recorded this because that could have been next week's show already. So yeah. So what's interesting about this comment, he says, I wish Pete would just open his mind and allow some of the guys to educate him on punk hardcore and some of the crossover stuff. So he and the next person that I'm going to read is assuming that I've never listened to this stuff, when actuality, I've listened to a lot of this stuff, right? I'm not the type of person that just says, I don't like this and I don't listen to it and I don't experiment with it to try and like it. I mean, I listen to, you mentioned Agnostic Front and DRI and the Crumbsuckers and the Cro-Mag. I mean, I listened to all those bands back in the 80s. They never really resonated with me all that much. I gave it quite a bit of a try. So, I've listened to the Damned. I've listened to I had owned a couple Suicidal Tendencies albums, right? It's just stuff that just didn't stick with me. And I'm going to go into the next one here. So the next commenter said, although it's an April Fool's Day joke, I would love to see Pete giving some punk or preferably post-punk records a spin. I reckon he might even like a few. I mean, if I can dig both old and new wave music, I'm sure Pete can. So once again, the viewer is assuming that I've never listened to any of this stuff or haven't already tried. okay, which I have. And I find his comment, well, if I kind of like new wave, then I think Pete can get into punk. It's like, so, but why is that? Because we're all individuals, right? So just because you, the viewer, were able to get into a style of music that you didn't think you would ever listen to, that, well, why shouldn't I be able to do that, right? But that's not the way it goes, right? So again, it's not like I hate this style of music. It just doesn't really resonate with me. I mean, there've been plenty of, my wife is a big country fan, right? So I've listened to a lot of the country music she listens to, and there have been times where I'm like, oh, that's okay. But as much as I keep trying, it's not really my cup of tea, right? It's just like, it's okay that people love it, but it's not really for me. So I think the kind of my point here is that I have tried a lot of this stuff. And the whole post-punk thing. Tom Verlaine passed away recently, right? And everybody's like, Pete, I can't believe you don't like the music of television, right? So I went out and bought their big popular album. And I was like, okay, everybody's telling me how great it is and how great of a guitar player is. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get it. I tried, Martin. I've listened to it like a dozen times, and I'm like, I don't know what everybody thinks is so great about it. It's just not resonating with me. I've tried. I want to like it. I gave it a chance, right? So that happens sometimes. And again, you mentioned many times here on the air, it's like sometimes you had to be there, right? There are people who call bullshit on that all the time, and I'm a firm believer too. It's just like, we're going to get to it in a couple minutes. People who weren't into the thrash scene and don't see, what's so great about it. It's like, well, you had to kind of be there when thrash was coming up and getting popular. I get people who weren't around then or weren't listening to it then, right? It's maybe not resonating with them like it resonates with some of us. So I think with a lot of the punk stuff, it's kind of the same thing. It's nothing I ever really got into heavily. And now all these years later, it's just like, it's just not doing it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. A couple of points I wanted to bring up. So again, what I find interesting about this discussion is it relates to a podcast episode I did, which I actually called "You Had to Be There," and then you and I did an episode that was sort of like that, which was a little bit. I think we called it I understand why you don't like these bands, sort of thing, right? I'll tell you a little story that's kind of interesting that happened to me, and it told me something about like what I'm inclined to give a try of something that I didn't know. So we recently did a Contrarians episode where we picked our favorite 3 post-punk bands, right? And we went through it. People loved the show. A lot of great comments and a lot of great sort of recommendations, right? And there was a band there called The Sound, which I went to Wiki. I looked them up. Thought, wow, this is kind of interesting, right? So that's my first thing that I do. I go to Wiki and I noticed the album covers and go, I've owned a couple of those albums. I went and looked, see if I had them. No, I don't have them. Damn, But the interesting thing about this band, they put out 5 albums. The leader of the band, this Adrian Borland, he had a whole life full of mental illness and schizophrenia, stepped in front of a train in 1999, killed himself, 41 years old, right? I'm playing these albums. They are so good and so interesting, and what a voice and really interesting lyrics. And then I go back and I read a bunch of reviews of it. And then I find out they had a band before that called The Outsiders, which was a punk band, and they put out an album in May 77, which is, Wiki says this is the first self-released punk album of all time. I'm going, what? I didn't know about this, right? Then they did another one in 79, which is even better, and it's actually punk, even though it's late for punk then. And this guy did 5 solo albums, so this amazing story. So I've been playing this stuff for actual pleasure, like play it in the background when I'm doing work and stuff like that. So the point is that I've noticed that I'm more inclined, and I'll bring up an example that I brought up before when we were talking off air last week. I'm more inclined to go back and find something where it's like you had to be there. Okay, so I was there. I just didn't know this band, right? Yeah. So it's exactly what I really care about and I find super interesting. And when I go read contemporary reviews of it, they're comparing it to things like, oh, you must have been listening to this, they must have picked, and I know what he's talking about, right? Because, I know this era, I know these bands, and I know what it came out of, and then it's fascinating, the story of the punk band. So the example I brought up last time, and I don't even have a band name for this, but I remember saying to you, someone can recommend something to me from 2002, and it's 5 white males from San Diego who are 35 years old, right? And I'm going, okay, so these guys grew up on Foo Fighters, but over here they grew up on Meshuggah and In Flames, right? And it's like, I was old when I listened to Meshuggah and In Flames, right? I'll just go listen to Meshuggah and In Flames, and here's a band influenced by Meshuggah and In Flames. I'm going, I don't really relate to you people, and this new kind of metal that you're making based on the Foo Fighters, Meshuggah and In Flames, at way younger than I am, but not super young, because that's a whole nother thing, right? I've often says, like, I can't relate to bands that are telling me the deep meaning of life and they're all 22 years old, sort of thing, right? I can't take their lyrics seriously or whatever, right? So there's a big element of you had to be there. But what I've noticed with myself is that I can discover bands that I knew nothing about from a magic time for me. But if the time ain't even magic for me, like 2002, 2010, 1996, right? Where it's like I'm already jaded and I've heard a million albums. It's something new and something parachuted in and something influenced by bands that I knew the original and blah blah blah, and now they're kind of building on that. I just really don't care, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big element of the you had to be there. I'll just make one comment on television as well. So television's a funny one because I love post-punk, and that I'm learning and finding so much more post-punk, because post-punk can mean almost anything, right? It's pretty nebulous, but television's like an early post-punk band, but they're from New York, and I've tried over the years all the time. I've gone back to television probably once every 18 months since 1977, and just never got into it, sort of thing. So yeah, so funny. So some things just won't resonate with you. So
yeah.
Should I go on to number 2?
Yeah.
I know I'm yapping a lot here. I guess we got to move this on. So let's see. So maybe I may not have. Well, I'm okay. So hey, I like some metal and a lot of prog. I will take the Ramones or the Clash over rock stars like Iron Maiden and their Sword and Sorcerers cosplay nonsense any day. Same goes for Dream Theater with their overblown Malmsteenish masturbatory epics. I guess it's a moot point though, because all three genres are dead for the most part, because bro country and hip hop goes on. The annoying thing about this joke is there's a lot of punk bands who are better than the metal bands they influence, yet this channel dismisses them out of hand, yet gives credibility to absolute novelty shite like Kiss, Merciful Fate, King Diamond, and Cradle of Filth. The mind boggles, right? So I don't want to go too far into this one, but I'll just say that at least for me personally, there are a lot of metal bands I've somewhat grown out of, but I find so much more in the aesthetic of a lot of this post-punk thing. So I am actually, I've said this to people, it's a little controversial, but like I feel like I grew out of Slayer. I just don't care about Slayer. And yet, on the other hand, I love Overkill. I love Bobby's whole world that he created, right? And I can listen to that stuff and go, this guy's my age, and I relate to him, right? And I don't relate to Slayer anymore. I don't know what happened, right? F and Slayer and all that, and the Pits and all that stuff. It's like, man, I just don't care, right? So I've dropped off those last few Slayer albums. I barely know them, right? Kind of thing. And I love Rain and South of Heaven especially. But so I kind of understand this point. This viewer is bringing up a little bit of a deep point that I guess is a little off topic, but this idea that it's that difference between abstract art and realism in a way. And you and I talked a little bit about this. What is perfect music? That could be a whole nother episode. This idea that, pop music, logically is perfect singing and perfect playing and perfect production and written by a panel of experts. So it should be perfect, right? It's a piece of cake. It's dessert. And then you compare that to adult tastes, which are funny tastes like coffee or beer or whiskey. I mean, what could taste worse than whiskey, right? It's literally like the most extreme version of an adult taste, right? And I think you get that in music as well. And that's why That's why you can have a different aesthetic that's hard to explain to someone, and it's a bit of a, you know, I you had to be there, or that, you know, drills into the core of your personality sort of thing. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. You know, this whole novelty thing, right? I get why certain people just can't accept Kiss, right? But again, for those of us who were growing up in the 70s, Kiss were the greatest thing, right? And not everybody got it then, but a lot of us did. But I get why people don't like Kiss. I always try to say, if you look past all the costumes and the blood and the money, there's some really great songs in the Kiss catalog, right? I don't agree with the whole Merciful Fate comment, because I never found, I think Merciful Fate were a very niche kind of band, and I never saw them as a novelty anything. And quite frankly, you know, there's some superior musicianship and songwriting going on in Merciful Fate. If you don't like King Diamond, I get all that, but man, to just kind of discount them because of that, I think is really not paying attention to what Merciful Fate are all about. So I don't know. Yeah, we can move on to the next one. All right, so here we have so this guy says, I've been watching less and less of SIA Tranquility due to the lack of variety in discussion topics. With Chuck Alvarez on board, an idea like this could develop beyond the usual three-chord trick, as it's quite an expansive universe. Lest we forget that the thrash bands were inspired by the exploited Anti-Nowhere League, UK Subs, and Discharge. If an April Fool, then an own goal, I'm afraid. Okay. You know, this whole like lack of variety in discussion topics is really interesting to me, because it's a very general statement, and I sometimes wonder, when I do see those from time to time, I wonder how much SIA Tranquility the viewer is actually watching, right? Because variety is something that, as a content creator, you have to work very, very hard at. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is you have, you know, let's just use hard numbers, right? So there's about 84,000 subscribers here at SIA Tranquility. We get close to 1 million views a month. Of that viewership, probably 80%, maybe more, just come here because they want to hear the same old all the time. They want to hear about Zeppelin and Sabbath and Maiden and Metallica and Priest and Scorpions and, you know, Yes and Rush, and that's all they care about. They don't care about the obscure bands. They don't care about all the great bands coming out of Sweden. They don't care about fusion. They don't care about, you know, anything that's like considered unknown. They don't care about. But then you get the smaller percentage, who are people who really want to learn and find new music. They're not interested in all that stuff. Like, I know all those bands. I want to know about all these, you know, little nuggets and all these other bands. So, but the problem is that when you're trying to create programming pretty much 7 days a week, week in and week out, you have to find stuff that the general population is going to want to watch. And if I were to just do every single panel show and every single show with just me about obscure bands and music and albums, we would die a slow death here. And that's the cold hard facts. And I went and did some analysis, because I get plenty of analytics here on the channel. I mean, just for argument's sake, right? So, and I get this all the time on the Wednesday shows when I do the new album reviews. You get, I'll do like 3 or 4 a week, right? Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. And I try to review stuff that I know is applicable to what we talk about here on the channel. And it's like, when I review, I think, let's see, trying to look exactly through my notes here. So last month, so over the last 4 weeks, I did 4 new album reviews. All right. 8 of them were on more obscure bands and their new releases. 4 of them were on fairly well-known to very well-known bands. Okay, the average views across the 8 where they were more obscure, the average number of views, maybe just over 1,000. So again, out of close to 1 million people that came onto the channel last month, and the 80 some odd thousand subscribers, barely 1,000 people would watch those reviews of newer, more obscure bands. Now, the 4 on the more established bands, just over 4,000 on average across those 4. So there's a big difference there. But even on like the new releases from the more established bands, still not a lot of people watching. But yet, Martin, if we were to go talk about our favorite albums from those more established bands, we would probably double or triple those numbers. So again, it's like people not wanting to listen to us talk about not only obscure bands, but also new releases from bands they love, right? It's almost like not really interested. If you want to talk about the old classics, that's great. I'll tune in. So, and it kind of goes across all of the channel or all the shows here on the channel. When we discuss topics that are more obscure, okay, lesser known music and bands, the viewership is way less. When we talk about the usual suspects, it goes way up. So again, it goes back to comments like this where there's not enough variety. And again, I'll touch on another thing. So we have what we cover on this channel. Again, it's no surprise to anybody. All forms of metal, hard rock, classic rock, prog rock, jazz fusion. It's basically what we cover here. What's amazing to me is that how few, and that's what we've always done. That's what the webzine has done, the magazine before that. That's been SIA Tranquility's mantra for decades. But there's very few people that come here that like all of that stuff. And what's interesting is that the people who are just into prog rock get very upset when we do stuff on metal. The metal people who don't like prog get very upset when I do programming on prog. The fusion stuff is very niche. The people who love jazz fusion, they'll come here just for that. They don't watch anything else. So it's very rare that we get viewers who are happy with everything. And so the punk people, I mean, the prog people want us to do all prog. The metal people want us to do all metal. People come to the Hudson Valley Squares and they complain that we talk about metal. It's a metal show. It always has been, right? All kinds of metal. We get people who watch in the prog seat and wonder and complain about prog and why don't we talk about more metal on there? It's not a metal show, right? You know, Martin and I try very hard on Fridays to be kind of agnostic, right? We cover lots of different topics here. We do the same thing on the UK Connection, but even on the UK Connection, you know, we do a ranking the songs on classic albums. We do one of those episodes. We generally pick a very well-known classic album, anywhere between 7,000 to 10,000 views. When we do our AOR melodic rock show, which we talk about albums in that kind of style of music, one unknown album, one well-known album, right? Generally, maybe 5,000 views. And then when we do our least favorite album by a known band, then we're talking big numbers again. So I'll kind of stop there because I think I touched on a lot of things, but I think the kind of my point here is that it's not easy programming for a channel like this. And I think some people tend to think, well, I just want to see what I want to see, right? But we're catering to a very wide, varied audience. So we definitely have a lot of variety on this channel. But I think when people make a statement like, I don't watch as much because there's not enough variety, well, what do you actually mean? Is there not enough variety for you because you don't like all the different styles of music, or you only like older music and you don't accept newer music? You don't like obscure bands, you're not interested in hearing about obscure bands? So I would love to get deeper into that, and maybe people in the comments will kind of share their insight there. But that is very frustrating for me to hear, because we go to great lengths to, I mean, Martin and I every week trying to come up with topics for this. You know, there's a lot of back and forth discussion, a lot of research on it. So anyway, I'll stop there. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but
yeah, you know, one interesting thing about, or a couple things I wanted to mention is, like, when you review a new album, it literally, the amount of things to think about, or the amount of concepts there, are like 1/100th of a band's history, even a small band's history, where there's even like let's say there's 4 albums or 5 albums. The synergies between comparing all that are so much larger that it's exponential compared to what anybody can think about when you're reviewing one album, whether it's a big band or a small band. And the other thing is the point of you know, some of these comments, maybe we're getting to this, but the idea of some people want to be educated on things, which is kind of interesting, right? Like educated by people they trust, who think they know something, right? Or are going to tell them the proper goods on it. But the other thing is I think people have always liked to listen to people talk about things they themselves have opinions on.
Right.
So they're constantly making a calculation in their head where they're comparing their own opinion with what the so-called expert is saying,
And if
right?
they can't do that, they don't want to participate.
Exactly. So it's hard to watch something on something you know nothing about whatsoever, unless you happen to be in that bright bushy tailed. I want to be educated on this, and I trust this guy talking to me. And the other 6 or 7 ducks fall in a row that it's something you might even potentially like at all or care about at all, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I find that kind of interesting. It's a little bit like politics, right? Where it's like you see a lot of people talking about abortion issues or race or guns because it's super simple to have an opinion on those things. But talking about restructuring the banks or what do you do in Syria, there's certain issues that it's like they're way too hard to really figure out, and you don't really have that great an opinion on it. So you see news anchors talk about it less because they're lazy, and it's you have to do more research, and then people care about them less. But anything that is just like anybody can write their opinion on any these are heavy issues, but they are simple issues, right? Everybody can just have an opinion on all of those things. That's when everybody participates and listens to the talk shows on it and heated debates that go on for an hour on any of those kinds of social or political issues, because they're constantly comparing their own opinions against them, and they can get angry or they can get super agreeable, or all of that stuff, right? Or they can argue about it, and they know they're kind of in the same room, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like I have a hard time. I mean, I've said this before, and it's a little controversial. I really can't, in a lot of cases, I can't stand as soon as someone mentions a band name and on some panel or something and starts giving their little presentation on them. If I don't care about that band, I just want to run out of the room, right? I just don't care, right? It's like, I'm not going to care about this. I don't have the time to care about this. I'm not going to check out this person's catalog, because again, there's 100 other catalogs where the things are lining up with the personalities and the story and the drama and the band and the timing and when this band was around and they're broken up or whatever, that you love that story to begin with, so you're more inclined to check that out. But if there's just none of those connections of place, time, generation, there's a much better chance you're not going to be interested, right?
I used to think back in the day that music was kind of, going to listen to a new record was kind of similar to going to watch a new movie, right? You want to be entertained. So again, you go to watch a new movie, you have no history with that movie, you've never seen it before. So you go, you watch it, you either enjoy it or you don't. And that I used to kind of equate to going and listening to a new record, right? New music. But I don't get that impression anymore from people. I think people still want to go watch a new movie to be entertained, but people don't want to give, especially when you get to a certain point in your life, you don't want to go to a new record to be entertained anymore. It's almost like, well, I don't know that music. People, I think, have associated music with kind of comfort now. And it's like, it's the whole familiarity thing is what's comforting to them. And if it's not familiar, I'm not going to let it in type of thing. So that openness to try something new is not really there as much in a lot of people, not everybody. I commend the folks who are watching who do stick in for those new album reviews week in, week out, and they constantly tell me, don't ever stop doing this. This is, how we base our purchasing decisions, based on things that you've told us and showed us, and we go out and listen. And that's great, because that's the reason why we do them. But it's just amazing how many people just don't want to do that. So
yeah. But bottom line, I'll just say for myself, and this is not a good thing to admit, but I literally could just go like this relationship I'm having with this band, The Sound, and playing these albums over and over and over again. Just loving it, right? And I've said this about Susie and the Banshees as well. It's like a band that I'll just, it's time to play something in the background while I'm working. I'm going to play Susie and the Banshees from 1981, right? So I almost feel, and I wrote this in a Facebook post when I was, raving about The Sound and discovering this band because of recommendation. It's like, who needs new music when there's probably 2 or 3 lifetimes worth of even stuff that has that extra little asterisk next to it that is going to entice me to go figure it out. So there's a lot of stuff that's, you know, old that is essentially
new to you, right? And how cool is it that at our age we can discover a band that we fall in love with that either was around back in the day when we were younger that we didn't listen to back then, or even a newer band that's been out for, you know, 5-10 years now that we never discovered.
Yeah.
To be able to discover something new, I mean, that's really cool. And I'm just watching you, how excited you are that you got into the band, the sound, and how cool that is, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of don't understand why people don't want to do that, right? So
yeah. All right, so I'll read another one here. We'll try to stick closer to our structure, I suppose. I know I'm babbling. Okay, so I'd like to see it, though. It might be interesting to see what non-punkers have to say about punk. Can you find things you like? Do you have insights about what you don't like? I'm not really a big punk fan myself, and I'd watch this and I'd probably learn something. I would agree. Oh, this is Pete saying this. I would agree with someone else. Learn from someone else doing a reaction video on music. So that this is a very concise point. Is like I'm a little fascinated by this idea of outsiders, you know, an alien just being parachuted into something who's like a you know, kind of a all-rounded music expert to give their opinion on, well, that's really interesting. What is it? Like, I remember commenting on pop or hip hop and stuff, and it's like it's amusing to see someone who's not from that world talk about something. And when reaction videos first came out, I kind of liked some of them, right? But I wanted that person to be, I wanted what they were reacting to be something I know is super special. And I want that person to be kind of an expert, where it's, you know, the magic of the reaction video is you as a fan of that band, seeing someone from the outside being totally blown away by something you already knew was great. So it's like, I already knew that sort of thing, right? So that's kind of what's cool about a reaction video thing. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I guess all I'm saying is there is value in that, seeing like somebody almost make a fool of themselves talking about something they don't know about, but seeing what a well-rounded music expert has to say, you know, almost looking into a little petri dish or looking through the microscope at this music. Very interesting what they're doing there, you know, and not knowing that, you know what, 1,000 bands do that. That's not interesting at all, you know, kind of thing, right? So
yeah, God, I don't understand the whole reaction video thing. And I find it fascinating that someone would think that they can learn something from someone doing a reaction video on a style of music or an album they've never heard before. And it's totally not in their wheelhouse, who they're really no different than you are, right? They're listening to something for someone like me to do a reaction video on, like, say, a rap album, right? I detest rap. Right. So what is anybody going to learn from me? It's like, he doesn't like rap. He's going to do a reaction video on a rap album. Okay. And I mean, I'm completely not credible there.
yeah, but what they're going to learn is what a super deep music expert doesn't like about rap, right? You're just going to go through it and you're going to point out things, and you're going to confirm all your listeners' views. It's like, yeah, I never knew why I didn't like rap, but Pete just articulated it for me.
Yeah. I don't know, it's because a lot of times what I get when I watch some of these things is like, you know, here you have these people doing reaction videos and stuff, styles of music they have no history with, probably don't even like, and they say all these great things. And then you wonder, well, as soon as the episode's done, are they ever going to listen to that again? Probably not. So what was the point of the whole exercise? I don't know. But people love to be entertained by that stuff. I mean, I get asked all the time, when am I going to do reaction videos? I'm not doing them. Yeah. It's like, you know, it's just, it's a way to get lots of views and it's clickbait, but it's like, I'd rather sit and talk about stuff that you know, new albums, whatever, and genres that I like, because I think that's more valuable to our viewership. But maybe that's just
bottom line is, people like watching people lose their mind about things that they've already known about for many, many years.
Right? Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's see. Now on to the next one. So here, too bad this is an April Fool's joke. Would love to see you do some punk stuff with Martin and maybe Chris Allo, for real. So many cool punk bands out there: Ramones, Misfits, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Circle Jerks, Dead Kennedys, Sex Pistols, etc., etc., etc. I find this, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about a little while ago, Martin. So here we have someone who would really love to see a punk show, but what does he do? He lists all the most well-known punk bands in the history of punk. So again,
yeah.
So let's just talk about the bands that everybody already knows about, right? And it goes back to what I was saying before. 80 to 90% of our audience just wants to hear us talk about the bands that everybody knows and loves. And while we have to do that, right, a good amount of the time, we can't do it all the time, because then the people who do come and want to hear about bands they're unfamiliar with because they want to explore more, they then have nothing to latch onto. And those are the people who get bored with the programming, because I already know everything there is to know about Led Zeppelin. I already know everything there is to know about the Sex Pistols, who were around for 2 years and all that. So again, it kind of plays on everything we've already talked about. So,
well, and the other point, I know you want to say something on this one, is that he also mentions Martin and Chris Allo, right? So all of a sudden, where's Pete? Right.
yeah.
So the idea is you don't want to be just a moderator of listening to other people talk. I mean, you want to be involved. You want to be interested there, because if you're not interested, even as a moderator, it's just dull for you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why, I would never host a show on golf, right? Golf is about as interesting as watching a rock out in my yard, right? So it's but a lot of people like golf. We have 3 people on the channel who like golf. Well, that's all fine and dandy. What am I going to do during all that, right? Yeah. Episode after episode after episode, right? So yeah, it doesn't work that way.
I always have this debate with people that golf is a game, except for off the tee, where it's a sport. Sport for the first shot, it's a game for the rest of it, right?
Yeah,
kind of thing, right?
I tried to get into golf.
Curling is a game, right?
Yeah,
yeah. Funny.
Really
bowling is a game,
yeah,
and not a sport. So okay, so all right, we'll move on. So let's see. Hilarious if this is a joke, but what would be really cool is a punk for people who don't like punk show. I'm not huge into punk, and I'm sure most followers of the channel aren't, but a lot of us are open-minded and open to being surprised by what the genre has to offer. I mean, I guess the point here is I did a podcast episode called Punk for Metalheads. So, I mean, maybe the concept here is the stuff that's most adjacent to what people would like. It's almost like the gateway into something, if it is crossoverish, like we talked about Suicidal Tendencies. I remember when Suicidal Tendencies came out. I was a big fan. I know all those albums, or knew all those albums, when I was more interested in them. But at the beginning, when they were punkier, I wasn't that into them. As they got more metal, I was into them. But again, this brings up the interesting point, is that even when they're being fairly metal, and maybe you're not liking it as much as metal proper, something about the whole ethos and the personality coming from this different world makes it more interesting, right? So again, it's that idea of abstract art, just the aesthetic, the messaging they're putting out, because no metal band is exactly like, them with the bandana over the eyes and the whole bit, right? And just again, just the whole like life philosophy, suicidal for life, and all that sort of thing that you get out of that band, right? And again, what you get there is when bands are not from a metal world and they make metal, it's usually kind of special sounding. There's something kind of interesting about it, right? So
it's like, we did that whole show with you and Simon where you ranking the Stranglers catalog, right? And again, we decided to do that because not only are you guys both into the band quite a bit, but there is some crossover potential there for that band with our normal audience. And I think, people appreciated that, right? So we will do that from time to time. So it's not unheard of, right?
This brings up an interesting point. I mean, I wonder how many fans out there, because you did get a lot of positive reaction to doing a punk show, right? Yeah. So I wonder if there's a lot of music fans out there, because I think I'm this kind of music fan, who love everything from who love a lot of different genres you wouldn't think, because but they love music from a certain genre, and they'll love almost I mean from a certain era.
Yeah, right.
And they'll love almost everything from that era, but anything from different eras they can't relate to. I mean, when I've said kind of weird things like I'm not a big fan of Deep Purple in Rock's a little down my list, and Volume 4 and Paranoid's a little down. When we did that show about how I love the late 70s and you love the early 70s a little more, right? There's a lot of 60s stuff that I use the word depressing quite often, right? For like a lot of 60s music and stuff. And I feel a little bit like that 70s. So I wonder if there's a lot of people out there in the world, because there's a classic rock magazine for punk called Viva La Rock, right? It's laid out exactly like classic rock, and you flip through it, it's like they're just talking about all the old punks, right? So, and when I go to, I thought of this because of, bringing up the Stranglers. When I go to a Strangler show, it's all people my age that look exactly like me, right? And I go to a metal show and it's kind of the same thing of an old band, right? So you wonder if just being a certain age means that you're much more amenable to. I think there's a lot more punk fans out there that watch your show that are simply punk fans because they're in their late 50s.
Yeah, yeah, they listen for those couple of years and they'll always like that stuff. But yeah.
Yep.
All right, so on to the people who are glad that it was a joke. So here we go. This commenter said, "This channel is going downhill fast. Unless it's an April Fool's prank, then never mind." And I'm like, does he already think the channel is going downhill fast? Or does he think that having one punk show a week would totally ruin everything else we're doing on the channel? So that begs the question, well, even if we did do a punk show and it was once a week or once a month or whatever, it's not going to change anything else that's happening on the channel. So why don't you just not watch that show, right? It's just like it goes back to what I was talking about before. The people who complain there's too much prog on this channel. There's one prog show every other week, right? There's one metal show every other week. It's like, well, if you don't like those types of music, don't watch those episodes. Watch the other ones that you like. It's like, if you're, I always use this analogy. Let's say I watch USA Network, right? USA Network has a ton of different programming on there, right? You got dramas, you got comedies, you got sitcoms, you got wrestling, you got movies. Well, maybe I don't like comedies. Maybe I don't like wrestling, right? Maybe I only like action movies, and maybe I only like thriller TV shows, whatever. You're going to watch what you like, and the others you just won't watch. But you see people comments like this all the time. Well, God, they're going to do a punk show. SOT's ruined. Well, it wouldn't be, because the rest of it's not going to change. Anyway, I won't belabor that one, but.
But maybe on a deeper point, if they saw you acting enthusiastic about punk, they say, "Oh, Pete's not being authentic when he's doing this show," right? So it's like, well, that means Pete's less authentic, period, right?
Yeah. Right? But I think everybody knows me well enough that's not how I operate, right? You would think, unless you just started watching last week, then all right, maybe you don't know me well enough yet.
All right, I'll read the last one here. So yeah, right. I've too much knowledge on this subject for this to be true. Even though I don't listen to much punk anymore, I grew up on hardcore punk and have a pretty vast knowledge on the subject. Actually, the reason I started watching this show was because after 40-something years, I got bored and needed to expand. I'm not sure if this is another comment. I've got a break here, but I don't see any revelation that this is an April Fool's joke. In case it's for real, I'm not personally a punk fan, but I applaud you, Pete, for your open-mindedness and ability. Okay, so that's a different comment. So the first one's pretty funny. It's like this guy's saying, I already know a lot about punk. I came here to expand my mind and learn about other things, which is a great, sincere, thing to have, sort of thing, right? So here's a guy who has come for more information, not just confirmation of his own opinions and things he knows about already. I guess I feel that way too sometimes. So I go two ways, right? Like one way is if you start talking to me about a band I'm pretty sure I don't care about, my mind can be closed and I'll shut down, right? But on the same token, I certainly don't want to ever hear anybody talk about again, what did Ronnie James Dio bring to Black Sabbath, or the first 3 Def Leppard albums are the only good ones, or whatever. So there's a lot of conversations I've been a part of over 10 times that I never want to have again, kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of storylines that I just know too well that I just don't need to have anybody telling me about them again. So yeah, I have a hard time finding that sweet spot where I actually want to listen to somebody talk about music, right? or even read about it. I mean, it's embarrassing, but the number of rock biographies and magazines that I read about music has gone way down versus what I used to, sort of thing. So yeah, so I kind of go both ways on that.
Yeah, you know what? I think since I'm trying to remember like when that stopped for me, because I used to love reading magazines and going over reviews and interviews and all that kind of stuff and all these editorials and things. And man, I can't get through one of them anymore. It's like maybe because I talk about this stuff so much now that I'm like, I need a break from it. And it's just bad enough to hear my own voice talking about this stuff. I don't want to hear someone else rehashing the same thing. I don't know. Yeah, that's a really good point. So
yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about hearing your own voice. It's like when I am participating in the comment section when you do these shows live, I can't have the sound on. I just can't. I don't want to listen to myself, so I have to shut the sound off. So it's quiet. And I can't play music. I can if I use the stereo, but I can't play anything else on my computer because the sound's got to be off. So yeah, I never listen back to anything. I never go back watch anything I've ever been on, right? Because yeah, it's like when a rock star says, "I don't listen to that album. I was there when I made it. I don't need to hear it again," right? It's like I never listen to my own band, right? I was there. So
yeah. And when I first started this channel, Martin, I used to rewatch everything all the time, only to critique myself and figure out ways where I can do and say things better.
yeah.
I find now I don't do that nearly as much. I will sometimes rewatch some of the panel shows where I know there was a lot of good interplay and back and forth going on between all the panelists, more from an entertainment perspective. But I very rarely will rewatch something that I did solo, and I do a lot of those because I don't need to. It's like I just, it's whatever. But
yeah,
sometimes there's some really good, synergy going on, some really good conversations that I like to revisit. But all right, so next one. Pete, I can understand your dislike for most punk, a lot of it being tuneless, talentless stuff, and shite vocalists barking, not singing out the lyrics. So therefore, I cannot understand your love of thrash metal. To my ears, both are intertwined. Punk, after all, ushered in the era of loud, fast guitar work, and this was the genre where loud, shouty vocalists with little or no discerning talent grew in stature, with the mantle being taken by thrash bands, screamers, and shouters. I don't dislike all punk bands, however, having been 16 to 17 when punk broke in the UK and saw all the big hitters and not so big live in concert around the time, bar the Sex Pistols. The only two that really shone out from that rabid lot were the Stranglers and the Ramones. However, I do dislike all thrash. I, for one, am looking forward to your comments on punk music in the coming weeks. Well, we're not going to be doing the punk show, as obviously. I don't really, to me, I know some thrash bands were influenced by punk, but I never really saw the connection. I think there's a punk mentality in some thrash, this whole being in the underground and it being raw and a little dangerous. But other than that, I mean, thrash is being known for extreme technicality and musicianship, where punk really isn't, other than some bands. And to me, thrash was just as much influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal than anything, and classic hard rock and metal than anything else, I think. So I don't, and again, you had to be there, right? I was a kid in the 80s. I was a teenager, right? And thrash came up and I got totally swept away with it. That's just the way it was. When punk came up in the 70s, I was listening to Kiss and, mellower stuff. So I was there when thrash was hitting, and I got swept away with it. This whole you had to be there thing. So to me, I don't think it's all that strange that you can like thrash and not really dig on punk. It's not that uncommon to me. But same thing, like extreme metal is another thing. There are a lot of people that don't understand the appeal of extreme metal. And again, extreme metal borrows on thrash, it borrows on punk, it borrows on Kiss, it borrows on Black Sabbath, right? It's just done it a different way. There's still, to me, for people who love punk and the craziness of punk and can't understand extreme metal, it's like there's a lot of qualities that are the same. There's still this element of danger. It's still really raw and aggressive and loud music and obnoxious music, but it just, there are people who just, they don't see that. And I get it, right? But it's like you can like one and not the other. But to automatically say that, well, if you like this, you should like that, or if you don't like this, you shouldn't like that, that doesn't really always hold the water for me. So,
yeah, and what I find interesting about this comment again is going down that road of adult taste versus kids taste, right? A kid, you like candy, right? Chocolate, right? And then later on, you like steak, right? Two different tastes, kind of thing. And you and I talked about again last week, what is perfect music. And I just mentioned pop. And I remember you talked about jazz being that way. And it always reminds me of a conversation I had with Steve Vai once about, I think I was maybe being a little passive aggressive and needling him about, high guitar notes, right? And you know, I personally don't like that sound when someone's way up the fretboard with a totally clean sound. And I said something to him like, it's almost like it's pure sound, right? Isn't it? Right. And he was a little argumentative and he says, well, piano is pure sound, right? And it's like, well, yeah, it is. But piano, I think, has a little more variety to it than a guitar, a clean guitar note way up the fretboard, right? So again, this idea of pure sound, it's like when you brought up jazz last week, it's like, well, maybe that's perfect music, right? No distraction from lyrics, no distraction from a vocalist, pure sound. You know, not a lot of electronics added to it in most cases, maybe a little amplification, that's it, but it's pure sound being made by this instrument and stuff. And like pop and like that, and this thrash punk thing, you know, this commenter is basically saying, I only like the stuff from any of these genres, so thrash none at all, but I like some punk. He's almost saying that I only like the stuff that sounded like something a child would like. The pure sensible music, the musicality, the non-shouty vocals, the properly played instruments, the properly produced and all that. So again, you know, I always bring back this abstract art thing, or you know, New York modern art in the 50s or whatever, you know, Jackson Pollock or whatever, a couple of big squares, or, you know, it's abstract. And that's what so many kinds of music are. So we get into this sort of thing. It's like, well, prog is like perfectly played, complex, and they're trying really hard and they're trying to make good music, right? Whereas this other thing, it's like, well, no, it's our entire philosophy. It's our whole message that matters, right? And by the way, we think our message is just a little more grown up and sophisticated than your elves story, right? Yeah. Kind of thing, right? So you get that. So yeah, that's almost a whole nother show. What is perfect music?
What is perfect music? Yeah, because to someone, you know, mayhem is perfect music. To someone else, that's like, oh, how can anybody think that's perfect?
But no, I think the deeper point is that mayhem fan would admit that what they're listening to is not perfect music, and they'd be proud of it, and they'd say, my personality is drawn to this because it's not perfect, right?
True.
But,
yeah.
but the mayhem perfect person might say that Rihanna is perfect music, because that's kind of my argument. It's like everything is done what logically everybody's supposed to like, but you know, they don't. So you know, so all of these odd musics, it's like, well, because I often liken you know, I've often said heavy metal, the heavier and the more technical death metal, and now metal's gone so far beyond, like all the vocals, all the playing, the progressiveness, the complication way down the road, right? But so it even stands even more so. But I've often said heavy metal is like four guys crowded around the hood up on a hot car, and there's a guy sitting in there revving the engine, and they're all looking at this nicely shampooed engine and amazing engine, and they're just oohing and ahhing. It's like they're looking at a really cool machine. And metal now is even more that way. It's like, wow, this is like a Swiss watch what they put together here, and that's why I like it, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people complain that some of the more modern, and I don't even want to call it popular because metal really isn't popular right now, but some of the younger bands that are coming up that are playing, like, I guess what you call traditional metal, it's too squeaky clean, it's too nice, it's too glitzy, and you know, this whole machine thing that you mentioned, it's totally what it is. It's very mechanical and not as kind of grassroots and raw as what, you know, we remember it 30, 40 years ago. All right, so kind of to close us out here, we have some other points that we kind of wanted to pick up. So Martin, I don't know if you want to dive back into some of our notes that we.
Boy, I don't know. I mean, we've gone a fair bit of time here, so let's see, what else do we have here?
One thing I think we do want to make sure we hit on. We talked quite a bit about those instances where you use catalogs as an example, where we have said, okay, I'm going to jump in and investigate this catalog really for the first time, that I have no history with. And after we go through the exercise, do we stick with those bands, right? So we used specifically, we talked about, like, for me, like the Tea Party and Tom Petty and Clutch, which were in recent memory. You know, Clutch, I had some albums and I had some familiarity with, Tom Petty, I never owned any Tom Petty albums, but I was well familiar with his many radio songs. The Tea Party I had no familiarity with whatsoever. So in the spirit of doing something here on the channel on those three acts who are pretty popular, and we have other people on the channel who really wanted to do them, I said, I'm going to go all in. And I'm going to go and get the catalog and immerse myself in whatever and do the shows with these other people who had a lot more experience with those acts than I did. And so Martin and I were talking, and he asked, well, of the three, did you, after we did those shows, have you continued listening to them and enjoying them? And in all three of those instances, absolutely. And I consider myself now a big fan of all three, and I'm still listening to the albums. And so that does happen. It does happen. And again, this whole concept of not being credible on a band or a style of music is always a worry for us, because, you know, we don't want to talk about stuff we don't know anything about. But occasionally you can do the homework and really dive in and begin to make yourself more credible. So I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
Yeah, and it's so cool that you know, when a catalog is over, you know, you've got the finite story. This is it. You can learn it start to finish. Yeah, and the interesting thing about this also is that when you hear of people going back in time and just listening to something, just you know, my entry point was this album, or I bought them all at once. You really get a skewed look if you weren't there at the time, sort of thing. Yeah. Like, you can go back and you don't see the difference between the band from 81 to 84. You might have bought the 84 one first and then the 81, and it's like you really aren't paying attention to the dates on them and stuff. And the last point I wanted to make here is a little bit related to that. Is it's funny sometimes when I talk about like an old Stars album or an old Riot album or whatever, like, for someone who wasn't there at the time and just parachuting in and playing it, and who maybe happens to be younger, or maybe even isn't even all that younger, they'll go, yeah, it's whatever. It's like, I feel like shaking him and saying, you don't understand. There were no heavy albums at that time. This was a big deal for this to sound this way back then. And like, yeah, you know, it really impressed a small amount of people. And it was pretty crazy. It was historic, right? But as time goes on, so many of those albums, it's like, what do I care? You know, who cares? 1977 makes no difference to me versus 1984. They're both so long ago, right?
Yeah. I mean, you make a really good point, and we'll kind of finish out, I guess, here over the next couple of minutes. But one of the things that's so cool about having someone like Bryce Talks Metal and Sydney on the Hudson Valley Squares is because they are so younger. They weren't there at the time. So when we talk about some of these like long-standing bands that we all love together, they're not as attached. I mean, Bryce is a perfect example. So, you know, you talk about Merciful Fate, all of us in our age group will pick Don't Break the Oath and Melissa as the two greatest Merciful Fate albums. Then you talk to Bryce about Merciful Fate, and his favorite albums are like the late 90s albums, right? He loves the early ones, but because he doesn't have that history like we do, he can have it. He's coming at a young age, 20-something-year-old kid. He's coming in a young age, and he's now discovering all those albums all at the same time, right? And making his own decisions. It's like me.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing, right?
You see what's going on there, though. You're admitting that you like reaction videos, because that's kind of a reaction thing, right? That's looking at, well, what is this strange alien going to think of Merciful Fate, right? It's like, you know, I know that I respect this guy's opinion. He knows a lot about music, but wow, let's see what he thinks about Merciful Fate at 27 years old, right? So
he's at least a metal fan, though.
It's but that's kind of what reaction videos are. It's like you see like some some 23-year-old woman who's got a master's in vocals listening to Rob Halford for the first time. It's like, you're kind of interested, right? It's like, oh, what's she going to think of this, right? So Bryce is kind of the same thing in Sydney. It's kind of cool. It's like, it's a little bit like a reaction video. You want to see what someone who wasn't there is going to think of this, and it's pleasant. You get a pleasant surprise when Bryce goes, oh, the 90s albums are my favorite ones, and it's like, oh, it makes you think about it a different way, right?
I guess. Anyway, so there you have it, everybody. Just kind of ranting on a bunch of things and just kind of tying up this whole punk parade thing. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of comments on some of the things we've talked about. and it'll be interesting to see what people have to say on this. So anyway, Martin, what's new and exciting on your end of the stick away from SOT?
Nothing much. I mean, just check out my audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The books are all at martinpopoff.com. We've got our Contrarians YouTube channel as well, which actually one of the ones that got a lot of discussion again. Kiss always gets a lot of discussion, right? So we had a panel on Unmasked, and people just will always talk about Kiss, won't they? So brings us full circle.
There you go. Cool.
Yeah.
So make sure you go over to martinpopoff.com and get a hold of some very, very cool books that Martin's got going on over there, and excited to see the new ones coming out. So what do we have going on here on the channel? We've got a little rant coming at you tonight, talking about the whole Motley Crue versus Mick Mars fiasco. So that'll be happening tonight on the channel. And then we've got ranking the albums of the great California prog band Enchant. So that's happening on Sunday. So otherwise, thanks for watching, everybody. Please enjoy your weekend. Visit us on the web at www.siatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button. And we hope you all enjoy your weekend. And for Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. We'll see you next week here at the Funhouse. Take care. Bye-bye.